Hi folks, Dr. Muddassir here with one more episode of the Supply Chain Show. Today I have a topic which is very close to my heart, which is sales and operation planning and how does it different from IBP, right? And most people ask me how you transition from S&OP to the IBP and what are the challenges and how you overcome those challenges. And to talk about on this topic, I have one of the subject matter expert in the industry. I have Gabriel Werner, who he is also he is not also he is actually the vice president of Blue Yonder. He has deployed S&OP and IBP processes in many countries and to many corporations since last 20 years. So if you want to learn about this topic, I think he's the best person. So Gabriel, welcome to the show. How are you?
Yeah, welcome, welcome, and thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I'm good. I'm great.
Good. I really like your background, very Christmassy, right? So I hope you're ready for the holiday season, right? Holiday season.
Yeah, very much.
Very much. Right. So just a quick introduction for the folks so they know about you and your
Mhm.
experience. That would be great.
Yeah, yeah. So as you said, so I've been in this area about 20 years, and I've been helping clients, particularly when they are in a sort of transformational state, and they want to increase their capabilities in business planning, and connecting business planning really up with the functions, the financials, the supply chain operations, the marketing side, the sales side, and you're getting them all together and plan for the business plan for success, and actually look ahead, properly, so they can see what's coming, and be proactive rather than reactive when managing the business.
One of the frequently asked question is, what is the difference between sales and operations planning and IBP? So
Mhm.
I know you've done a good research on that topic. So maybe you want to share your thoughts and also if any presentation material you have.
Yeah, I'll bring up a slide
Yeah.
in a few minutes or in just a minute. So maybe just as a quick comment to begin with on this topic, I mean, IBP is typically looked at as an evolution from S&OP. So it's sort of the next stage or the next step in the evolution of business planning. So it has therefore, of course, a few commonalities with S&OP, or you could look at S&OP as the sort of the root of IBP, but it's broader, it's wider, and it tackles a slightly different problem statement, or slightly different planning problem. So maybe I'll just bring up. Can you see my screen?
Yes,
Can you see the
absolutely.
slide? Yeah, very good. So this slide is really intended to speak about this, right, and trying to make a simple approach or a simple definition onto this distinction of S&OP versus IBP. So it's basically divided here into these five topics or five sections, right? So we could start with the first one on the objective. So S&OP traditionally probably came in most of the cases from the supply chain domain, right? And it's therefore very much focused on demand and supply balancing, and very often also in a volume-oriented fashion, which made it traditionally very difficult to interact with other parts of the business, with the commerce people, the sales people, marketing, but also product management and those type of folks who are interested in this, but who would speak a different language, if you will, right? When it comes to the levels of aggregation and on which they would look at information, when it comes to like financialization of predictions and forecasts. So on the IBP side, it would then be more from an objective perspective, more a value-based conversation, right? The idea is, how can we deliver the financial business objectives of our company, right? And what is it that we need to do that? What is it that we need to potentially change in our approaches on the market in order to achieve that? So key difference, for example, volume versus a financial perspective. Yeah, if we were to move on the next one, right? The focus. S&OP came from within, and it has a tendency to be a bit sort of internally focused, whilst on the IBP side, we see that very much to actually go beyond the four walls of the enterprise, right? If we look in the CPG space, you will find that downstream when you look at the joint business planning processes that CPG companies entertain with their retail customers. While if you look more in the auto or in the industrial space, It's more about collaboration upstream with suppliers, getting an understanding of supplier capacity, even into a long-term sort of business planning process. So that could be a good distinction there as well. The ownership point that's coming up next is I think also interesting, right? Because if in a company it's the S&OP folks who are trying to get everybody else on board on a process, that sometimes generates sort of a little bit of internal pushback, right? Because they are basically proposing a planning process that suddenly spans across a lot more parts of the organization. As mentioned before, the finance guys, the business, the sales folks, product management, marketing, and so on. So it's also then in this context very helpful if from a solution perspective, from a support perspective, you find something is easy to use and actually gets everyone on board. But to maybe also focus on that real quick, right? The other thing is an IBP process really is a business planning process. Therefore, by definition, it's a management-sponsored activity that needs to be chaired by the C-level, right? Else it's not going to really fly. So if we then look at the next point on features, I think this is one of those elements that S&OP and IBP will have in common. Both will need a let's say sufficient representation from a modeling perspective, also of the supply chain. That's what they have in common, to make sure that you can found or have the appropriate foundation for example, for scenarios. Which means also some form of planning intelligence, some form of planning solving engines are required. But in the IBP space, it's then really also about financial impact analysis, also some elements of project planning when it comes to managing the life cycles of products and understanding how they will interact with the existing portfolio. What is it that you're going to maybe take out of the portfolio? What is the impact of that? Are there any cannibalizations and things like that? That need to be taken into account. And ultimately, it's about commercial alignment, right? Making sure that we know what we intend to sell, and we know that what we intend to sell is also supportable by the supply chain and is in line with our business objectives. And I think the last point is important then when it gets to connecting the core business planning process with the rest of the planning levels that we are familiar with, like what's typically called the S&OE, the sales and operations execution planning level, and down to then the operational levels as well. So here, a trend that we see in IBP is that executives tend to get frustrated if the data they're presented with to support decisions has gone stale, right? And has gone, is a little bit old, or is just, static in a PowerPoint. So this kind of stuff. So therefore, connectivity into other systems, into let's say I'm going to call it lower levels of planning, is also very important to be faster in business planning as well, right? We all have seen the agility coming into planning in the last sort of 10 years, and it's reaching that business planning level just as well. Therefore, connectivity I think is key, and another important distinction between the two.
No, I mean, very good slide, and I think very good explanation. And the way I would just summarize the point is, S&OP, demand supply balance, volume driven, as you said, IBP, financial driven. Focus is mainly, internally talking to the cross-functional team, your product line, your marketing, R&D, engineering, and for S&OP and purchasing guys here, you talk beyond the four walls. The ownership, generally S&OP owned by supply chain team, even though when I do my coaching and S&OP training, I said owned by everybody, but definitely is driven by supply chain team in most cases. But in the IBP, as you said, is executive team needs to sponsor it and drive it. Same with features. So when we talk about S&OP, it's more about scenario planning, demand, and supply balances, and IBP is the financial modeling which comes into it. So the point comes into my head is this. So is it fair to say that IBP is the expansion or natural extension of S&OP?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of that, right? So it was an evolution over time, right? If you look at some of the players in that space who publish around this, they would typically make statements like that, where IBP is being portrayed as a natural evolution of S&OP by becoming more mature, right? Actually reaching out, moving away from the volume, going to the financial perspective, which doesn't mean you're not suddenly not interested in the volume anymore, right? What it actually means is you want to be able to see it in both ways expressed at the same time, right? Ideally, with the ability to just flick from one to the other.
No, so that's fine. But I'm gonna ask you a challenging question here, which is, so when I do the S&OP training and do some, for example, advisory consultancy work as well, the reason I see is, even so, I have in my blog, I've got this S&OP audit tool where basically tell people into their 5 stages, or in terms of the protocol, documentation, or the governance of S&OP in general, where they stand. So you do a self-assessment, you get the score. And it is challenging itself to basically achieve first and sustain a high maturity level of S&OP. So my challenging question is this: so can the organization who are not really mature in S&OP can jump to IBP, right? Or you have to be a mature organization to jump to IBP. So how you transition from S&OP to IBP, how you see that?
Yeah, that is indeed I'm not going to say a challenging question, because it's a question about a challenge, right? And to some extent, because the challenge indeed is with the let's say the ability of an organization to absorb the according change, right? So this is from my perspective, this is not directly related to technology. It has some touch points with the technology. Because it's more about understanding what is that pace of change that makes sense for the customer to move. Let's say, just using level models, right? If you want to move from a level 2 to a level 5, are you as an organization able to absorb this, or should you go sort of in a step-by-step approach and set yourself a milestone? We want to reach level 3 by this date, and level 4 by that date, and so on and so forth. The important thing to then keep in mind really is to make sure that these steps that you divide your journey into, that they actually, from a value delivery perspective, that they stand on their own feet, right? So that you're not find yourself in a situation that you suddenly embark on a fairly long transformation journey where the value is only sort of at the end of the tunnel after a long period. And the other reason why that's important is, business conditions tend to change, right? So if you have this situation, you map this out as a value a realization journey, and you then for whatever reason start to having to deviate from the journey, at least you have realized value already until you got to the point of deviation. So that is another very important aspect to make sure you have as an organization, a very realistic view on your own ability to absorb the change.
Okay. No, I think that's a perfectly valid point, perfectly good point from that. So if I ask you the question, so in your experience, what are the top challenges for corporations or companies to move from S&OP to IPC? Oh, okay, you got a slide for that. Perfect, right?
I got a slide for that. It's
yeah. Says the famous line. You got a slide for that.
We tend to be prepared people at Yonder.
Yes, that sounds like, yeah, how do you know? Okay, maybe because I sent you the questions before, right? That's why. Okay, yeah. So
right.
Tell me, what are the biggest challenges?
Yeah, so I think one of the key, or it's very common, let's say, challenges to really also, it's not just about the numbers going from volume to finance, or actually including both. It actually is also to accept that it isn't actually so much about the numbers, right? So this good old saying, where do you want to be exactly right, or roughly wrong, or roughly right and exactly wrong, or whatever it might end up being. At the end of the day, it's more about understanding what are the risks that I'm exposed as a business, what are the opportunities that I'm exposed to as a business, and what are the assumptions that I'm making as a business as I create my plans. And you see me using the plural here, right? Plans, as in scenarios, right? To be able to then understand, okay, if that's my going in assumption, then this is my plan, and that's the risk I'm willing to take here, to become conscious about this sort of meta information. And therefore, it's of course critical from a support perspective through technology to have something that helps you capture the information behind the numbers, and not just the numbers, right? So that you can also revisit decisions in the past. So it's something we call corporate memory, which is basically the ability to go back in time in terms of planning, so that a decision that you may have made 3 months ago that might now affect you in let's say another 3 months, but you want to make decisions now. You want to for example, increase capacity, or you may have to renegotiate with the supplier, whatever it is that that comes out of this. It's important to be able to understand what it was that you were thinking when you made those decisions, and understand the assumptions, and also then therefore understand how the assumptions need to change as time progresses. So that I think is a key point.
This is, sorry for interruption, but I think you made a very good two very good points. Is this, you talked about plans and the assumption changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the again, being a, I've deployed S&OP myself into many different businesses, and from the plan to a division level. And this is one of the challenge I saw, that people tend to forget those assumptions. That whatever you decided 6 months ago, and the assumption the assumptions are not same. So how to basically keep those assumptions intact, first point. And second point is how to explain people the assumptions has been changed during the course of time.
Yeah, so I mean, therefore documentation is key, right? And
Yeah.
it is a matter of discipline. Also, when it comes to executing the IBP process, going through the cadence, whether that's a monthly or a bi-weekly or even a weekly, we see that emerging as well. That even business planning processes go down to higher frequencies, and it really does become a matter of discipline to make sure you appropriately document changes you make in your plans along with the assumptions that you're making. And from a technology perspective, it's therefore helpful if you actually can associate those bits and pieces of documentation within the planning solution itself, so that you document. It's almost like we were all familiar with the notion of a comment in Excel, right? So it's following a similar principle, that you can actually associate all that meta information with the exact part of the plan that they impact, right? So that part, that location, or that supplier, or that capacity, or that customer, whatever the entity is you're making assumptions on.
No, that's great. So I see one of those. I think the challenges you put on the screen. The two of them I'm interested is this modeling financials with agreed way of handling complexity. Rebate, discounts, exchange, and second is from data to insights, right?
Yeah.
So one, I would love to use a ERP, for example, where the whole complex S&OP is built in, because regardless what ERP you use SAP, Oracle, or whatever ERP, right? So that's your main data source, right? Where you have all your financials, where you have all your demand data, order data, discounts, and all this, right? So the challenge I feel is, first of all, in my life, and I never use any sexy software to run S&OP, and I would love to do it, right? And that's one of my for example regrets so far is, and I find it super complex actually doing this part, which is as you said, modeling financial with the agreed handling and the complexity, and how we use data to insights. Because whatever data I have, forecasting data, supply capacity planning data, when we do consensus review, it's a say again, it's data and analysis, and the insights is based on how good the demand planner or analyst is. So this is where the knowledge of the individual analyst or the supply chain team, if you want to call them, maybe more than one person, comes
Mm.
into the play. And I would love to know from you, is this, do we have, again, you are Blue Yonder, again, I never used Blue Yonder, maybe you can guide me. Do you have this capability in Blue Yonder which can basically resolve these two problem points?
Yes, I can share a few thoughts, and I have a bit more content that I can also share in this context.
Yeah.
Maybe let me first begin on the first one, on the financials, because there's a very important word in here, and it actually is the word agreed, right?
Yeah.
The agreed way, because in the business planning cycle itself, you don't what you don't want to necessarily do is to completely replicate all your financial planning, right? Which is actually following the same logic that on that level, you're also not going to replicate your complete supply chain planning either, right? With all the granularity that would come with that. So there's a concept. We quickly go to the next slide. There's a concept we refer to as boundaryless planning, right? So that's something in the Blue Yonder world where in the chart here, we're focusing a bit on the supply chain side of things, where we say, look, it is important that you can effectively go up and down the hierarchies or backwards and forwards in time as per the planning challenge at hand, right? And that same principle, of course, applies then to the other plans that find their way into the IBP process, such as the financial plans, the sales plans, marketing plans from promotional perspective, the joint business plans, and the CPG and retail example. They all come in, and you can almost think of the entity that technically can support an IBP process almost like a Rubik's magic type cube, right? Where if you are a representative of operations, that the side of the cube that you're facing represents the information in the level of granularity and the language, the business language, if you will, that makes sense for you to consume, right? If you're the finance department's representation, you might look at a different side of that same cube, right? The same information, the same single source of the truth, but the information is going to be translated. I'm going to use that analogy to language here. Is going to be translated to your business language as a finance person, so it speaks to you in the terminology that makes sense for you. And the same would apply for, let's say, product management or marketing, etc. And for sales, it's going to be very simple. Right? So that's really important, right? And that's why I also mentioned this notion of being focusing on this agreed term on the previous slide. It's important that there are some rules of engagement, right?
That is important, but I think that's one of the hardest part, right? If you think about it, that is really, in my experience, one of the hardest part, this agreed part.
I agree. Yeah. So I agree with the statement. Yeah, no, it is, but it's important to get that right, because then else the risk is that you get too detailed too quickly, or you have mismatch in what are the degrees of freedom from a decision-making perspective that you do want to have inside the IBP process versus, for example, the financial planning process. So those things need to be appropriately agreed.
Yeah. Okay. No, so let's talk about technology, right? Because that's the bit I'm interested in. So how the recent technology, and again, there's a big buzzwords around artificial intelligence and on things like that. How these technologies is now helping us to to do this, convert data into insights, because that's the bit I'm interested. How we're talking about insights and predictive maintenance, predictive or prescriptive and things like that. So that's the bit I'm interested.
Yeah, I mean, let me maybe first say you're absolutely right. I mean, everybody is now. I mean, quite suddenly, if you think about it, right? Quite suddenly, everybody has all sorts of AI, and if we look at all the marketing materials that are floating about, it almost feels like we're not in 2020, but in 2040. It's Skynet is going to come soon, and the Terminator is around the corner. No, but I mean, realistically speaking, right? So, I mean, Blue Yonder has the advantage of having a very long heritage actually in this space, right? It goes as far back as into the 90s, where the founder of what we now call the original Blue Yonder, it's a company we acquired 2 years ago, has trained their first his first neural network at the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, right? To sift through all the data that that experiment would create, right? And they basically had the theoretical physicists telling them what they should be looking for, and they could train the network, the neural network, to go find it in all that massive data. That was sort of the original big data before that was a term. And 2008, we started to then put that type of technology to use in business context, right? So that's like 12 years ago, and at that point in time, we didn't have that hype around AI ML that we see nowadays. So that's sort of, just from a background perspective, the kind of heritage that we can look at when we say we can use machine learning to drive insights. I mean, the easiest form of insights is insight generation is to just look at historic information and, you know, derive insights. Like I think a good example is for suppliers or for materials. There's all sorts of grading and categorization and these type of things that very easily can be generated. When we get to a bit more complex use cases, I've listed out a few here. We can pick a few. Let's start on the top. The notion of segmentation. It's a big topic, and it's a topic that if a company wants to run their supply chain more focused on the expectations of their customers, then it's a capability, or it's a concept that needs to be governed by the IBP process, right? So it's very tempting to try and, you know, have a one-size-fits-all supply chain, because that's easier to manage. But reality is, if companies look at their customer base and the way their customer base buys their product, then there will be different behaviors. And you can try to identify those behaviors. We all know the approaches of the good old 𝐥𝐤𝐬𝐵C type analysis. And you can therefore try to derive settings for your and parameters and assumptions, since we talked about it, for your planning processes. But what if you could use something a bit more intelligent that allows you to leverage far more data than you could in a manual approach? What if you could leverage not just the data in the ERP environment, but all sorts of externalities, external data, to have in this case, we're using a combination of unsupervised and supervised machine learning to propose to you as an organization what your segments actually are, right? So that is a deep insight.
Sorry, Gabriel, sorry. Allow me to interrupt you, but this is super interesting. Let me tell you why. Because I teach a supply chain strategy in master's program, you know, locally, and a few other courses. So there's one of the famous papers which talks about when we talk about supply chain strategy design, right? And the research says you need to focus on they talk about two things, which is the customer segmentation or product segmentation, right? So you are into a functional product or innovative product, or if you're talking about the customer segmentation, you know, are you into the e-commerce sort of market, or, you know, or more for like B2B market? And the third, which I would like to add, is the lead time segmentation, which is, you know, because then you have to put all these three things together, which is to design your supply chain. So the way I'm listening to you very intently, and I feel I think what you're trying to say is this tool, what you got here, can help us actually giving us insight dynamically around those segmentation. Is my understanding correct?
That's absolutely spot on. Yes.
Wow.
So it goes as far as you could even do it on the combinations of these dimensions, right? So you could start segmentation on let's say the combination of product and customer, and then start to segment. And the basic, or the big advantage is that you can use far more attributes than you could ever use in any sort of manual 𝐥𝐤𝐬𝐵C type analysis approach. You can use hundreds of attributes to drive segmentation. And the other advantage is you can this is why we're calling it dynamic segmentation. You can recreate it far more frequently, right? If you think about it, normally, if in the past, if a company at all was leveraging segmented supply chain concepts, it would have been an activity that they would have looked at, once a year or maybe once every 2 years, because it's a big consulting sort of type effort. But if you automate this, if you use machine learning to recreate that very frequently, what that actually means is that you can change the parameters in your supply chain management environment and in your sales management environments, things like order promising, at the same frequency. And this is why I said earlier on, you need the governance element of that as part of the IBP process, to make sure that this is being reviewed and there's some RACI around that to make sure it works. But it would put a company in a position to be closer to their customers, to be closer to the market and to the expectations of the market, and to detect when those expectations change, right? Because the nature of dynamic segmentation means that, let's say a customer product combination moves from segment 1 to segment 2 for the next 2 months, and then it moves back for the next 2 months, and then it moves into a third category for the end of the year, right? So this capturing this type of dynamic in the behavior is very interesting, because, as I said, it will allow the companies to be very, very close to their customers' expectations.
Yeah. That part is super clear. So thank you for that. But I think I'm going to move the discussion further. And one of the headline really interests me here is this disruption prediction. For example, that means late shipment, out of stock, supply shortage. So, and I have not seen that attribute, or let's call it that functionality, built into any ERP system. I mean, I don't know, maybe SAP HANA would have, I'm not sure about that, but I have not seen any, and that is for us is super, I think super cool, because the only thing we do is we create the the legendary traffic lag report, which had designed the made to stock, made to order. If your A-class items which are made to stock go below label, then it just gives a red light, and then you basically pushes people to replenish or expedite. But again, it's a very much non-dynamic environment for any disruption prediction. I am not saying that your tool is good enough to predict COVID. I don't think anybody could do that.
I don't think anyone could.
But let's talk about the normal supply chain. So tell me about how this functionality works.
Yeah, so this is so for us, that's a very important distinction here that we want to make with the market, right? So if we look at the, let's say, mid 90s to 2010, if you look at that time frame, what you notice is, globally speaking, companies became more and more lean, right? They were taking inventory out of the supply chain. If you aggregate that to like a global GDP type data, that's what happened for about 15 years. Companies became efficient. And then about 10 years ago, with the rise of more VUCA, right, more volatility, more uncertainty, and all that good stuff, and what happened is companies reacted to that. They wanted to be more agile, right? They wanted to be quicker, more responsive. But the reality is, the way this was, the supply chains of the world tried to achieve this was by basically taking the same planning principles that they had before, but just speeding them up, right? Let's just be quicker. So right? That's all that happened, right? But nothing has fundamentally changed. No different principle was applied. Let's just plan quicker. Therefore, we're super responsive.
No, so just me add few points here, right? And I think you made a very, very great observation here, that people want to be agile and responsive. At the same time, they want to reduce inventory, and they think by expediting or doing things quick, make them agile. That is a total wrong concept.
It is. So and it shows in the data.
Yeah,
it shows in the data.
So right? When I do the teaching in the university, and this is one of my class, the difference between lean and agile, and there's a blog to that. To become more agile, the solution is in your design rather than anything. So you need to look into your total supply chain design before you really change anything with the system.
I agree. I fully agree. And as mentioned, right, it shows in the data. So the supply chains of the world between 2010 and 2020, the inventory was put back in again, right? Everyone's increased their inventories, and then, oh, look how agile we are, right? So there is a bit of a discrepancy there. And it's not just inventory. It's also if you're a larger company and you can afford to be fast and you can afford to hold that inventory, what then would still happen a lot is that the bullwhip effect is just being passed on upwards, upstream in the supply chain too, and it hits the smaller suppliers who are less equipped to deal with that, and it diminishes the value that they could contribute to the business as well. So what we're proposing is something we call predict and pivot. It's here also on the slide on the headline, right? Is the idea, instead of just reacting quickly or reacting rapidly, is really to predict what's going to happen, and then actually, leverage the increased degree of freedom in order to proactively pivot your supply chain on what you had predicted. So I can give a few examples, right? So I spoke about the origin of our machine learning technology. So we're using that type of technology, which is sort of Blue Yonder patented capabilities, to not just look at demand prediction, but actually this notion of disruption prediction. So one example could be to directly predict service level, right? Rather than making service level a function of, okay, this is my demand forecast, this is what I have of supply, therefore this is what I'm thinking I'm going to have as service level. Because if you directly predict it, you can again have that principle of using far more information into that prediction. It was very interesting when we did this with clients, because we would look at the standard deterministic plan output, which would show everything's all right, and we would look at the risk prediction for the service level, and it would actually tell us, you know what, that item at that location, that is going to be a risk, and this is actually the percentage of that risk, and here's the reason why. So this is another a good feature of our machine learning, is it's quite explainable. It's not much of a black box. It actually can give you insights on which were the most influencing sort of factors.
Yeah. I think we're running out of time, and I think last question. I think we already run out of time, right? So I generally try to keep episode between 20-25 minutes, but because I think it's very interesting topic what you're talking about. So last question, maybe a quick answer if possible, is this. So when I go into the plan and people say, oh, I want to deploy S&OP, and when I try to do a root cause analysis, it's actually maybe not less, maybe less root causes down to the people and the process itself. I think the main reason is they don't have the basics. So let me tell you what I mean by basics. So they have not done their ABC analysis. They have not done their let's call it made to stock, made to order. They have not done their batch order quantity. Okay, so let's do that. People do this. That's great. And once these basics are in place, then we deploy S&OP process, right? The demand planning, the supply review, and all this. What then happened is, over the period of 4 to 5 or 6 months, the data goes through the ERP, right? And the parameters which you have set up to drive your inventory, your purchase orders, your work orders get obsolete. Then all the output which is coming out of your MRP ERP is not as smart, as good as. So I wrote a blog by ERP sucks. It's one of the reasons this, because ERP by now, we're talking about machine learning and all the sort of sexy stuff available to us now. Still, we have to download all the data and then spend 3 weeks in analyzing, cleaning it up, and then put it back. So when I see this line, which is called parameter tuning, that it sounds like that there's a capability when, if, for example, you launch a new product, you launch 20 SKUs, right? You put a stock in place because you have to put the stock in place. You've done your S&OP meeting, IBP meeting, everybody agreed and decided, yeah, let's put the stock, it's going to go. Then what happened is, what you think you will sell, it never sells, and something else will sell, or maybe something happens which you think will happen. Then what I think there should be right now technology available, which should give, based on once the good data goes through the system, call it your system or any ERP, should give us, let's call it a notification to change the parameter, to reduce the safety stock or increase the safety stock or change the batch order quantity, right? So do you have this capability within your system?
Yeah, so I'm glad that you ask it this way, that should be a signal that's actually given, right? Because we sometimes hear this as a requirement where they just, the expectation is almost to just have it automatically changed.
No.
Right.
It has to be
And
significant.
typically we would say, you know what, if this is a supply chain parameter, maybe at least at the beginning of this, as we all learn to absorb this type of technology, it might be a bit more cautious to say, you know what, it would be nice if I just had an overview and say, look, maybe over time, let's pick a lead time parameter here, right? This is how it actually has evolved over time, and here's a prediction, right, of how it's going to evolve, and therefore you should consider changing that parameter in your planning engines, right? So that's kind of the workflow we anticipate here, at least for now, at least for the beginning. I guess it's with all technology, right? Once we have used this extensively, the trust will increase, and maybe we end up automating that to a higher degree. But for now, that's the thinking here.
No, that's great. I mean, thank you very much. I know we kept the discussion pretty high level. I know folks wants to know more about details in case studies and some more examples, and hopefully you find time. I know you're a super busy person, and if we can find time together, and we can probably do follow up episodes after this, if that is
Happy
okay.
to, yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
No,
Cool.
and also, I mean, I've let me just quickly flash this, sort of my virtual business card, right? If
Yes.
any of your viewers wants to get in touch, you find me on LinkedIn. I also publish stuff on Twitter, so.
Cool. No, when I'm going to publish this, I'm going to tag you definitely, and hopefully people. So please, I would recommend everybody to go and follow Gabriel. A lot of good content coming out from on the website, and I think one of the practical tools. So I'm hoping that we can collaborate more. So Gabriel, thank you very much for your time. It's been a
Thanks
pleasure,
for having
and
me.
actually I've learned a lot, and very excited to see what you guys doing there, and hopefully we should be able to practice and experience it one day. So thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good. And I wish you all, and especially your family, Merry Christmas. So for the folks, but if you lasted that long, please do the usual like, share, subscribe to the channel, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
So if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave your comments below.